right, so I'm going to introduce here Donald Hoffman. He is known as somebody who is now kind of pushing the boundaries of perception sciences. His book, A Critique of Reality, which I do recommend you read, is an excellent book for the layman to get in there and, you know, after a second reading maybe, start to understand. So yes, I wanted to introduce this interview by saying that, like, you know, we're described by Donald, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, as icons for one another.
Right.
There's a lot of hidden information. A lot of it can be pulled in through looking each other in the eyes, right? And this is one of the ways through evolution that we've been able to even know hereditary, like whether or not someone's related to us.
Right.
But I don't know about the complex realities behind Donald Hoffman's eyes. I'm assuming he's here for this interview for the millions of viewers who will, you know, get a chance to buy his book or be able to you know, digest some of his concepts. But even the cameras, right, are an icon.
Right.
They can be uploaded into consciousness in a computer, and the computer or the robot will respond to its environment in much the ways that human beings do. So the first major idea that's going to be fun, it's really fun to talk about, is, and I guess we should use this cup as an example.
Sure.
This cup conveys to us what we intuitively believe is objective reality. Because it's just a strong compulsion we have to see that this cup has a shape, I can grab it, and bring it up to my mouth.
Right.
But according to Donald Hoffman, when I look away from the cup and I look back, what existed when I looked away has nothing to do with the reality, the objective reality. Behind that is another reality.
Right.
that cup, it essentially disappears into a state,
Right.
an unknown state. Something's there,
Right.
but it's not the objective reality that we would understand. That's very, you know, dense concept, but maybe you can go on to explain a little further.
Sure.
What I'm trying to say.
Actually, for people who like to play video games in virtual reality, this is pretty straightforward for them. So suppose you're playing, imagine, say, Grand Theft Auto, but with a virtual reality add-on. And you're playing a multiplayer game with people around the world, and you see that you're chasing a red Mustang, and there's a green Corvette and so forth. And players around the world with their headsets on in their virtuality, they're all, yeah, I see the red Mustang and the green Corvette, and yeah, you're chasing it. And you can look over and you can see your steering wheel. And of course, when you turn your head in your headset and you see the steering wheel, you're creating the steering wheel that you see, right? You're getting pixels sprayed to your headset, and that's causing you to create this three-dimensional impression of the steering wheel that you're seeing. And then when you turn your headset away, you look over there, you're no longer rendering the steering wheel, you're rendering, say, the red Mustang. And so now for you, you're creating the red Mustang because, of course, in reality, in this example of virtual reality, the thing that you're interacting with is not a real green Corvette and a red Mustang. You're interacting with software, circuits and software and bits and voltages in some supercomputer that's going over the internet and you know, keeping all of the players in sync. So you all agree, not because there really is a green Corvette and a red Mustang that you're all interacting with, you all agree because you're all interacting with the same circuits and software, which are utterly unlike anything that you're seeing in the game. But what you do is you have this nice interface, the virtual reality interface, that lets you control all that circuits and software. In principle, you could play the game by toggling voltages in the computer. I mean, good luck, it would be really, really hard, but in principle, you could do it. It's much, much easier to control the reality when you don't even know what the reality is, and you have this nice interface, a virtual reality interface. And so for anybody who, you know, the younger generation that's just into virtual reality and will be even more so, my idea is actually pretty straightforward. It's just like, when you take the VR headset off from when you're playing a game, you have another headset on. We've always had a headset on. Evolution gave us a headset. It hid the truth from us for the very same reason you don't want to toggle voltages inside the computer to play the game. That's just the wrong way to do it. It's just way too hard. Knowing all that truth, it just gets in the way. Having simple eye candy that lets you interact very, very quickly makes you able to control reality even though you're ignorant about the reality. And that's what you can prove from the theory of evolution by natural selection is what natural selection would do to any organism. The selection pressures are uniformly against seeing any aspect of reality as it is. And they're uniformly for giving you some kind of user interface, a virtual reality that lets you control those aspects of reality that you need to control to stay alive and reproduce, even though you're ignorant about what those aspects of reality are. So it's natural for us to think that it's more fit to see the truth. Creatures that evolved to see reality as it is, we would assume would have a competitive advantage in, the basic functions of life: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and mating. And that therefore those who saw reality as it is would be more likely to pass on their genes, which coded for the more accurate perceptions. And so that we could be, confident that we're the offspring of those who saw reality more accurately. But so that seems intuitive, and in fact, very, very bright colleagues of mine who study evolution have said that. But even though it sounds intuitive, when you actually look at the mathematics of evolution by natural selection, in particular something called the replicator equation, and actually run simulations of the replicator equation and then do theorems. So the simulations I ran with Justin Mark and Brian Marion, my graduate students, and the theorem was proven by Chetan Prakash. I brought him the idea and said, I think there's a theorem here, and he had the mathematical chops to bring it home. And what we find both in the simulations and in Chetan's theorem is that organisms that see reality as it is go extinct when they compete against organisms of equal complexity that see none of reality and are just tuned to the fitness payoffs. So in other words, seeing the truth will make you extinct. Seeing a virtual reality that's been shaped to give you just the symbols you need to do what you need to do to stay alive and reproduce, that's what evolution favors. And so, to be very, very explicit, three-dimensional space, as you perceive it, is absolutely nothing like objective reality. Nothing like it. It's just like the virtual reality that you see with your headset on with the Grand Theft Auto kind of analogy is nothing like the circuits and software that are running the game. And so this is all just a virtual reality. And so space-time is just our virtual reality. Think about it like the user interface on your computer. You have a desktop with icons. Well, we have a three-dimensional desktop, what we call space-time, and the cup is just an icon, just like you have icons on the desktop of your computer. Like when you're writing an email or writing a book, you have a little blue icon in the middle of your screen for the email you're writing. It doesn't mean that the email in your computer is blue and in the middle of your computer. It's silly. So the stuff you see on the screen in no way resembles the reality that you're interacting with, and it's not there to show you that reality or to try to resemble it. It's there to hide the reality and give you simple icons that let you control the reality. So I think the idea right now, for my generation, is a little hard. We are not used to the VR technology. I think for the next generation, where they'll be spending much of their day in virtual realities that are just as compelling and immersive as everyday life, it'll be a no-brainer to take off your headset and go, what about this? Perhaps this is a virtual reality as well. And I'll say, as it happens, yes. Evolution by natural selection has guaranteed that this also is just a virtual reality, and we've had a headset on from the time we were born.
And in fact, there's numerous proofs for this. In your book, you refer to an experiment where people are fed a drink that has one has calories, the other is devoid of calories.
Right.
And they interpret people who drink the drink devoid of calories to interpret things further off. And this is based on a fitness payoff. If you have the calories, you can achieve that prey, and if you don't, then you can't. But these are very these are very kind of superficial ways of seeing this bigger, more profound reality. That this entire scene is a virtual reality that through evolution over time has conspired for us to only take in reality as much as we can for survival and procreating, right? And spreading our genes, etc.
Right. Yeah. I mean, from an evolutionary point of view, the amount of reality you take in is zero. Right? Because it's literally, you see none of reality. Space-time itself is not objective reality. So all of the contents of space-time, all the objects we see, are not reality either. So I'm just saying what the theory of evolution predicts. It says that all of this is just a user interface. Even my perception of you, as you were talking about earlier on, my perception of you is not the real you. I just see skin, hair, and eyes. But if you look at your own face in the mirror, you know that what you don't see, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, your love of music, all the rich world of your conscious experiences, that's not visible in the mirror at all. I mean, this is a terribly simple icon compared to the really complicated reality of the conscious experiences that lies behind it. And when I'm interacting with you, I mean, you have a handsome face, but that's not what I'm interacting with, right? It's the all rich world of your conscious experiences that's the real reality. What I see is relatively trivial compared to the real you. And that's the way it is with all of what we're seeing. What we're seeing is trivial compared to the reality that we're actually interacting with, and in no way resembles that reality.
Right. I'm lucky enough to have a handsome icon, I suppose. But
exactly.
It's good for my fitness. But I want to talk a little bit about vertical perceptions. For a long time within your realm and your discipline and all of your peers, they have this concept that, like, for instance, a fly sees less of reality than a human on the basis of the complexities, the way we think and the complexities of our mind. Because of that, because evolution, according to what the prevailing idea is that it brings us to more truth.
Right.
So, but you're claiming that just in the same way that a fly might enjoy the taste of feces or a pig or a rabbit, we find it disgusting. Right. And they're entirely different perceptions, but if I understand correctly, there's no real hierarchy of perception. And in fact, you're saying, and this is kind of interesting, I did want to ask you about this, that a fly has a less complex way of seeing reality. And as you add complexity, you get further from truth, according to Terence. Like, for instance, if you have 10 photoreceptors and you have two states, then you have, what was it, 2 in 2,000 of those would be actual, if there is an objective reality. Would that then entail that a fly sees more of reality than a human being? The exact opposite of what we assume.
Right, so most people assume that perhaps as creatures get more and more complicated and their sensory systems get more and more complicated, there'd be selection pressures to see more and more accurately, and you'd need to. And it turns out the mathematics goes just the opposite. Yeah. So the more complicated, the more perceptual states you have, the probability that you might accidentally see the truth goes to zero. And so there are no selection pressures even for simple organisms to see the truth. So no matter how simple you are, natural selection will not push you or shape you to see the truth. So it's only because they're simple that they might accidentally, the fitness payoffs that you're being selected for might accidentally line up with the truth. But that's just an accident. And so there are no selection pressures even for simple organisms, what look to us to be simple organisms, to see the truth. But this also leads to another counterintuitive conclusion, this whole idea that we've been shaped not to see the truth, but to have like a user interface to a deeper reality. When you have a user interface, you are necessarily only getting insights to certain aspects of the reality. And most of that reality, your interface is just hiding. And so we tend to think that what looks simple to us entails that what we're interacting with is simple. And that's false. Things that look simple to us, we could be interacting with very, very complicated aspects of reality, but it's because our user interface has to give up, right? The reality is infinitely complicated, whatever it might be. I've got this finite interface. So of course my interface is dumbing things down, and finally not saying anything. Most of objective reality, it doesn't say anything about it at all.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that objective reality is simple. By no means. It could be far more complicated than I am. So it's a rookie mistake that we make to assume that what looks simple to us allows us to infer that that's simple in objective reality, whatever it's referring to. That inference goes completely by the wayside. And therefore, most of our inferences about what looks simple to us must be more fundamental to the objective reality. Right. No, it's like looking at your desktop and saying, well, those pixels on my desktop, I mean, the icons aren't the truth, but the little pixels, that's the objective reality. No. That's where the interface on my desktop sort of gives up. You get down to pixels and then there's nothing more it can do.
Right.
So the pixels aren't the foundation of reality, they're just the foundation of your interface. And it's just because your interface has to give up that you end up seeing pixels and you stop. But whatever, what is it that's behind the pixels in the computer? Well, there's still all the circuits and software. It's really, really complicated stuff that's rendering those pixels. So it's just a rookie mistake to think that what looks simple to us, creatures that look simple to us, like E. coli, bacteria, viruses, who knows? Who knows what we're interacting with in objective reality? It's just wrong to think that what looks simple to us is pointing to a reality that's really, really simple. Far from the truth.
And so one of the examples I liked in your book, and I like analogies because they're really useful, is you talked about the critter and stuff. And
Right.
It was an analogy, and it was based on this critter, and it could only see in gray and black.
Right.
And you're trying to express the idea that this critter, in order for it to survive in its environment, it's going to select to see fitness payoffs as opposed to truth. So if it were to see truth, it would see proportions of things.
Right.
It would see a lot of food or a little food. But if it looks for fitness payoffs, it sees just this narrow scope of the right amount of food that I can attain.
Right.
So in that respect, and I think it's hard to make the leap for people to see what I'm looking at around me and how I've evolved to see things that are just for my survival.
Right.
And so one of the things that I had a hard time contending with was this concept that the consistency of the reality behind the truth reality. Like, for instance, even that critter, even if they're looking at truth, isn't really seeing what's really behind reality. But there's a consistency there. And that's what's interesting for me, is that both you and I look at the cup, we look away from the cup, we look at the cup, but for some reason in that specific area of space-time, because even space-time doesn't exist in this bigger reality, there's something consistent. Right? And so that's why I think that a lot of people criticize you for solipsism. Like we're creating it all, we're making it all up. But you're saying no. There is something objective out there. We just have no idea what it is.
Exactly right.
What do you have to say about the consistency of our space here?
Right. So again, I think it's really helpful. It might sound really bizarre, but for people who play in virtual reality, it's sort of trivial what I'm saying. The example I gave before. So you've seen this red Mustang and the green Corvette, and all this. It's a multiplayer virtual reality Grand Theft Auto game. So all the players agree. Yeah, there's a red Corvette, there's a green Mustang, and yeah, the red Corvette is going faster than the green Mustang. Everybody agrees, so there's complete consistency. But in fact, there's no real thing as a red Corvette or a green Mustang. All it is circuits and software. But because the reality, all the players have a similar interface to the supercomputer. And
because
that's
of
it.
our evolution.
That's right. So because we're members of the same species, we have a similar interface to that objective reality. So there is an objective reality. So I reject solipsism, which is the claim that all that exists is me and my perceptions. So I mean, I have life insurance. I'm betting my hard-earned money that something my family would exist even if I died. And so I'm betting against solipsism. And in the virtual reality example, you can see that the VR example is not saying solipsism. It's saying there is an objective reality, which in that metaphor is the circuits and software of the supercomputer that's running the VR simulation. The reason why all of us are in real time rendering the red Corvette the red Mustang and the green Corvette. We're rendering them anytime we move our headsets in the right way, right? We see the red Mustang. And I might be seeing a red Mustang while you're looking over there and seeing the green Corvette. We're all interacting with the same reality in this metaphor, which is the virtual, the supercomputer with its states and circuits and software. But so it's not a solipsism. There is a reality.
Right.
It's just not like Corvettes and Mustangs. It's something completely different. And so I'm saying, yeah, we all agree that we see a cup and we see three-dimensional space, and we see this table. We all agree. And even when I'm not looking at it, you can still see it. No surprise for anybody who's played in virtual reality. We're just rendering it when we need to, and we don't render it when we don't need to, because we're garbage collecting the stuff that we don't need. We're saving memory, and we're only render it on the fly as we need it. And so that's not solipsism. That's just, there is an objective reality that we're all immersed in. It's just that we assume that we saw it. It's just, and we don't see it. It's like someone who plays virtual reality, again, Grand Theft Auto, and assumes that what they're playing with is real cars, and, real Mustangs and real Corvettes, and they have no idea that it's all in the headset and all in their mind.
This next question, I kind of want to go out on a limb and maybe get you to speculate a little bit.
Okay.
So one of the things regarding our fitness-based truth, our fitness-based ways of receiving reality is that you have a number of scenarios, and some that we find like almost dramatically despicable in the animal kingdom, where a firebug will attract a mate. It will mimic the mating ritual, a larger bug, and then when the other bug comes, thinking that they're gonna, have an engagement and get to procreate, the bug instead eats the other bug, right? And we see a lot of behaviors in humanity that, and I'm trying to bring in the idea of the question of morality.
Right.
This idea. Now, someone could take this idea and say, well, accordingly, if this is my virtual reality framework, then why not? Why shouldn't the world be a game of Grand Theft Auto? And in fact, it's one of the most popular games, right? We're fascinated by it, and we're actually, it's something that compels us, right? But yet, everyone looks at these kinds of things as, socially unacceptable, et cetera.
Right.
So someone might use this to justify this kind of behavior. Furthermore, and this is a more interesting kind of in-depth concept. I'm throwing a lot at you right now. But,
sure.
In all of our hero stories, the hero engages with risky behaviors that often are selfless, right? And we get this idea that what, like for instance, a whistleblower, they risk their, against their better judgment, one might say, their survival payoff to bring to humanity a corrupt measure, a corrupt activity that they can, maybe fix, So, is it possible that the whole concept behind, our moral landscape is that these people, because they're rejecting survival benefits, they're seeing a deeper part of reality, something that's beyond our virtual, headset, and they're actually risking their own, their imperative to simplify their reality to get what they want, and doing something that is novel and moral. We all have an attraction towards these people, or the concepts that embody these people.
Right. So when we see altruistic behavior, we tend to think that that's a higher moral kind of behavior, and we tend to applaud that. And we tend to look down on things like siblicide, killing your own siblings, your brothers and sisters. Now we would view that as just completely wrong, whereas altruistic behavior we would view as very, very good. And of course, I share those feelings. But when I ask myself, do I have a deep understanding about why something should be deeply right or wrong? Is there a deep, deep understanding for morals? I have to admit that I have never seen a theory that I find deeply explanatory about morals. I've never seen anything ever that that makes me feel like, yeah, we understand what's going on with morality. And I'll tell you why I'm not comfortable and what I would want from a deep theory of morals that I've never seen anywhere in any writing. So there's a bird called the blue-footed booby. And the mother always lays 2 eggs. And the 2 chicks, when they hatch, the first item on their agenda is to fight to the death. They peck each other until one dies. Or one gets pecked and then thrown out in the sun and it cooks to death. And the mother watches as one of its babies dies and the other one brutalizes it. She did it to her offspring, and she doesn't get in the way. She didn't do it to her offspring. She did it to her brother or sister.
Right.
And she doesn't stop her offspring from fighting to the death. And when you look at why they do that, it appears that in their environment, their niche, there are not enough resources for the mother to successfully raise 2 chicks. And so she has 2 chicks and lets them fight to the death so that the more fit one is the one that she's going to raise. And so from an evolutionary point of view, it looks like the trade-off is between siblicide and extinction. And evolution has chosen siblicide over extinction. Now for humans, of course, we have moral repugnance to the very idea of siblicide. Siblings fight, of course, brothers and sisters, notorious, we all fight our brothers and sisters. And then later on we love them, but we do fight, and sometimes, quite viciously, but fighting to the death we think is just deeply wrong. Why? Is it ultimately deeply wrong? If so, why is it wrong for humans and not for the blue-footed booby? Or if you say it is wrong for the blue-footed booby, are you saying that extinction is better than siblicide for the blue-footed booby? In other words, what I want in a theory of morals is a theory that extends not just to human behavior, but to all species. I want a theory of right and wrong that when you apply it to any species on the planet, you get the right answer for what's right and wrong. Until we can do that, we have a very parochial notion. It's just whatever I feel like is right and wrong. And of course, I'm going to go with the feelings. Like I feel siblicide is wrong, murder is wrong. I'm going to go up. So I'm not saying to behave badly. I'm saying if we try to understand deeply what we mean by right and wrong, I don't think anybody on the planet, myself included, understands deeply what we mean by right and wrong. So I'm not, of course, espousing bad behavior. I'm saying what we call good and bad behavior, let's, of course, abide by good and bad behavior. But do we really understand deeply what we mean by that? I think not. I certainly don't. And I've never heard any philosophical theory that can deal with the deep question, give me a theory of right and wrong that applies not just to humans, but gives me the right answer for all species.
Yeah.
And we're nowhere near that.
Yeah, and I think having this perspective of a virtual reality that we're seeing, and it's based on fitness payoffs,
right.
Mimicry is useful in nature,
Right.
There's a bird that resembles the excretion, there's a spider that resembles the excretion of birds, protects them in their environment from harm, and people always have the moral question of like, if you're starving, what would you do? Is stealing okay? All of these, these are real questions. They're our most poignant moral questions.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree, and I think it's while we're of course behaving properly, it's very important for scientists and philosophers to be thinking deeply about what we really mean by that, and to not just accept our own emotions and intuitions at face value. I would like, as a scientist, a deeper theory, and we don't have. And you're right that we do see, by the way, deception is ubiquitous in nature, right? It's all over the place, and of course, most creatures make their living by making some other creature die. Yeah. Even if you're a vegetarian, you're making creatures die so that you can live.
And it has a lot to say about also your theory, and if you think of somebody who, for some reason, they had the psychological persuasion that they weren't afraid in one iota of death. You know, that death was not, because ultimately, this is guiding our morality, our survival, our fitness payoffs, all of it. This whole reality is based on this concept of, you know. But if you had somebody who somehow visited an afterlife and came back, or something of that, or had a strong religious conviction, would they be acting more morally? You know, because they're no longer behaving according to our model, the one that we all are compelled to behave by nature, by millions of years of evolution, from inorganic matter to now. You know, it's I find that to be an interesting concept. You know, what is morality in that framework? You know,
absolutely, and even the things that we think of as the high points of morality, like again, altruistic behaviors. From when you look at it from the point of view of evolution by natural selection, you can actually give an evolutionary account for many altruistic behaviors. It's an idea that it's called inclusive fitness. So it's an idea that apparently Darwin didn't have. He had the notion of fitness, but inclusive fitness brings in this idea that if I share genes with you and other nearby members of my species, if some of my genes that I'm sharing with you encourage me to do behaviors that might help you to survive, but at a potential cost to me, so that I might even die, if the payoff to you is greater than the cost to me, discounted by how genetically related we are, then that gene, the gene that codes for me to actually behave in a way that could kill me to save you, that gene can actually propagate through the species. And so you can actually have an evolutionary account of altruistic behavior. And in fact, that's the only scientific account that we have of the genesis of altruistic behavior. So there's a squirrel called the Belding squirrel. And when one of the squirrels, so they're ground squirrels and they have burrows, when one of them sees like some predator coming, a hawk or something flying, it will emit a shriek. And that's a warning call to all the other squirrels, so the other squirrels can duck. But it's increasing the probability that the hawk will pay attention to the shrieking squirrel. The one that's shrieking is increasing the chance that it might be dinner. And so here we have, so that's altruism, and that works if the gene can propagate through the whole species, if the probability that you die and the cost to you is less than the benefits to the others that share that gene. And what's interesting about it is there's another way of looking at it from the gene's point of view, from the gene's eye point of view. Is the genes really don't care about you, right? They don't care whether you survive or not. They just care about the gene getting into the next generation. So this is the inclusive fitness point of view. So this is a different way, this gives us a completely different way of thinking about altruism. So most of us think altruism, oh, well, that's the highest moral thing that you could possibly have, you know, if someone sacrificed. But there's another point of view that comes from evolution. And I'm not saying, by the way, that this is the deepest point of view. I'm just saying it's the only scientific point of view that we have so far. And from this point of view, what altruism looks like genes that couldn't care less about you, and they're willing to sacrifice you. They program you to do what we call altruistic behaviors, but you're just a puppet, according to this view, of the genes. And so what you call altruism, in some sense, the genes don't care about you. You're the puppet. They make you look, and we praise you and so forth for being altruistic. But the genes are in some sense just pulling the puppet strings and killing you, just to make it more likely that the other copies of the genes will get passed on. Now, I'm not saying that's the deepest point of view, but it's a point of view that many people don't understand. Is the deepest scientific point of view that we have so far about altruism. So again, in terms of deep morality, I've already confessed I don't have a deep understanding of morality, of what's deeply right and wrong, and a deep perspective of what we should think about altruism. And I haven't seen anybody else who's given a scientifically plausible, deep understanding of morality. None. Or philosophical. And now when I talk with people, for example, who've had deep mystical experiences, right, and they say that they've seen, for example, at the deepest level, it's love,
Right.
and unity, and the divisions are just an illusion.
Right.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they may actually be seeing something very, very deep there. As a scientist, then, suppose it's true that the
Okay.
deep, deep reality behind space and time is love, and so forth. Then what I want to do as a scientist is to understand why that deep reality of love, if that's the case. I mean, and I'm not professing that I know that that's the case. I'm just saying, I'm professing that I can't dismiss friends who've said that they've seen that in their mystical experiences. So for sake of argument, assume that that's true. What I would want then is a deep understanding of why in our interface we see something very, very different.
Right.
We see
Right.
competition to the death, we see deception, we see what looks like the only story we have from a scientific point of view of altruism is one in which we're just puppets being played by genes that couldn't care less about us, and they're sacrificing us to allow other members of our species that have copies of the gene to survive. So that's a very deflating point of view of what we thought was a very, very high moral action. But it could be, from my point of view, the evolutionary point of view may just be an artifact of our interface. So maybe there's a very, very deep point of view in which love really is the ultimate right, and so forth. Then what, as a scientist, I really want to understand why that appears within our interface in all these other nefarious guises.
Sure.
And again, I put that out as a challenge that I'm not yet able to meet, and that I've never seen anybody meet. And religious, philosophical, or scientific, I don't think any of us really understand deeply what's right and wrong and what morality is.
And vice versa as well. Now you're seeing something within your model, your virtual model, that doesn't have any explanative reasoning in regards to a fitness payoff. You know, people have mystical experiences and/or, psychedelic experiences where they have this sense of oneness. They have this sense of unity with all things.
Right.
Their compassion becomes exaggerated within them, and they respond differently to their environment. You have to ask yourself as well, why is that happening? You know what?
Right.
Because then that's part of our now virtual reality. And you, as you said before, the only way to push these new ideas forward is such a challenging idea that you're presenting to every area of science, social or otherwise.
Right.
Because you're saying we got to take this way outside of space and time and our interfaces, then bring it back and see how it now can be reintegrated. Because we're still in an interface.
Absolutely.
You can't remain out there because it's not well, quote unquote, useful or working within our interface, correct?
That's right. In some sense, science has been, of course, tremendously successful. And very, very, it's one of the greatest inventions we've ever had. And, it's changed our lives, given us technology. And so, I'm a scientist, I love science. But science, so far, has only studied our interface.
Yeah.
Science has been about what happens inside space and time. Well, that's not objective reality, that's just our interface. So we haven't even begun to explore reality with science. I think the tools of science are up to it. I think it's the right tool, it's the best tool we have. I think, of course, meditation and personal exploration is really, really critical. I think the two need to go hand in hand, personal exploration and in meditation and so forth, together with the tools of science. But I think science can begin to explore what's behind space and time, the objective reality. And it's an infinite vista out there. So we're only at the shore of the ocean. We're just now putting our toes into the water about the reality that's beyond the shore. And it's going to be fun. I mean, lots of exploration to do out there. I'm sure almost everything that I believe is false. I mean, we're just going to be blown away. I mean, we laugh at people who believe the Earth is flat and that the Earth is the center of the universe. And that was just a few hundred years ago. And we burned people at the stake who thought that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. That was only 400 or 500 years ago. We were burning people at the stake for that. we have a consistent track record of being deeply wrong and being deeply convinced about what we're deeply wrong about, believing that it's true. And so I think that, what we have to do as scientists is to put out theories about what we think the objective reality might be, and not hold them too tightly. Always be ready to find evidence that contradicts your theories. In fact, that's what we should be. As scientists, of course, you're supposed to be looking for the evidence that would contradict your theory and to actually tell others what experiments they could do that would potentially find evidence against your theory. That's how we make progress.
Right.
So dogmatism is the absolute opposite of what we need. We need a humility that says these are the best and most precise ideas we've got so far, and we're being precise so we can find out precisely where we're wrong and then evolve our theories. And so I'm looking forward to exploring as fast as we can. I want to find out what's beyond the shore that we've been on here, what's behind space and time.
Yeah.
What is the reality behind that? As you know, I'm playing with the idea that consciousness is fundamental.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I'm taking very, very seriously the mystical experiences of people who have, who claim to have experiences behind space and time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I know for sure that they're right, that what they're saying is true and a genuine insight, but I have to be open to listen to what they have to say and say, suppose for sake of argument that they're having insights. What theory of objective reality, what theory of consciousness would I have to create to capture what they're claiming their experiences are? And could I have that theory of consciousness that captures their insights? Could I then take that, get it mathematically precise, project it back into space and time,
Yes. Yeah.
and get back the science that we know inside space and time, evolution by natural selection, general relativity, quantum field theory. In other words, whatever theory of the objective reality, I'm playing with consciousness, maybe I'm wrong, who knows. But so I'm playing with theory of consciousness. Whatever model of the evolution of consciousness I come up with, when I project it back into space and time, I better get the dynamics of evolution by natural selection, general relativity, and quantum field theory, or I'm wrong. So the science that we've done so far, I'm not throwing away the science we've done so far. It's wonderful. It's a constraint on any deeper theory that we come up with. The deeper theory needs to project back into the science of the interface. If it can't project into the science of the interface, or a generalization of the science of the interface,
Right.
like a science in the interface that actually, for example, brings quantum field theory and general relativity together into some kind of more unified mathematical theory. If I can't do that, then the deeper theory is wrong. So this is science in the sense
Right.
that I can tell you what I have to do, and if I can't do it, I'm wrong.
Right. So it protects the theory from people entering into an emotive experience of nonsensical kind of realities. Like maybe the prevailing science right now might need to be modified or generalized, but it doesn't need to be rejected, and it shouldn't be rejected because there's a huge history behind it.
Right.
There's a structure that we use according to our virtual reality.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would just echo that in the sense that I think most scientists would say that none of our scientific theories are true, right? I've never seen a scientific theory that I would say is true. I think that all the theories I've ever seen are wrong in some respect. So general relativity and quantum field theory contradict each other, right? We know that there's something deeply wrong, and yet there's something also deeply right about them. They have captured something. And so as scientists, of course we have to take the best tools that we've got so far, and we're always trying to figure out where they're wrong so that we can get to the next step. But they're not trivially wrong. There are a lot of experiments that they can account for. And so the fact that they can account for many, hundreds, thousands of experiments means that any deeper theory needs to give us at least that scientific theory, but hopefully a generalization. So it might sound contradictory. So I would say on the one hand, all scientific theories are false. On the other hand, they're not trivially false, and any deeper theory needs to be able to get what the current scientific theories do get, but then get something deeper.
And like you said, even though you brought up a lot of examples of Donald, why don't you just step in front of a train if you think this is well, that would be dangerous, and it wouldn't be useful for you to do such a thing, because even though it is an icon that is, not reflecting to us actual reality, there is something being reflected to us that is part of that absolute reality.
Right.
Do you think that in your theories, you've already stated that, like, you're proving your theories according to probability, and this does bring me into another criticism, but you're
Okay.
according to probability. So you're not even positing that there's necessarily an objective reality beyond our interface theory of perception. You're saying that there might not be.
Right.
We may be just trapped in this maze of, interfaces.
Right.
Like you said, conscious agents working together, experiencing,
Right.
choosing, and then acting, and then it's like there's just a giant network within
Right.
that.
Right.
But it also could be an objective reality out there, correct?
Right. Right. So of course the ultimate answer is I don't know. Right. So all I've been able to do is to show that one of our best scientific theories to date, evolution by natural selection, entails that space-time and objects are not the final reality. It entails that. Now, whatever I say beyond that is a new leap, right? So it's not entailed by the theory of evolution by natural selection. So for all I know, solipsism could be true. I mean, I don't think so. I'm not betting on it. In fact, as I said, I've got life insurance, so I'm betting against it. But as a scientist, what I have to do is propose a theory of objective reality, make it as mathematically precise as possible, then project that theory back into space-time where we can actually do experiments and make predictions about what we'll see. And so I do think that my working hypothesis is that there is an objective reality outside of space and time. And I'm proposing that it is consciousness, and I have a mathematical model that I call conscious agents. It's mathematically precise. We're working on a dynamics of it, and it's quite interesting. And if it works out, then we will be able to actually make new predictions about what happens behind the interface. We'll be able to understand how space-time interface is related to this deeper reality of conscious agents, and then we'll be able to hack the interface.
Yeah.
Right. So think about it this way: someone who is a wizard at Grand Theft Auto. I mean, all the other players would be really amazed at this. They can do all sorts of things in the game that I can't do, and they know all the tricks. But now imagine someone who actually knows the software behind Grand Theft Auto. Right. They actually know the code. They know how to go in there and change stuff. They can do stuff that the wizard of Grand Theft Auto would be completely stunned. They can change the parameters of the game. They can change the existence of cars and the colors of cars. They can do anything they want to. And that's the potential technology that's going to open up if we can see what's behind our space-time interface and how this deeper reality that I'm playing with conscious agents, how it projects into our interface. Once we understand that, if that's on the right track, it's going to open up technologies that are mind-blowing. Yeah. We'll be able to play with the parameters of space-time itself.
Yeah. I want to digress just for a moment and bring up a criticism I think that you've expelled, but I'd like to bring it up again because I've been thinking about it, and I'd like to hear your response to it in more detail. So you do argue for the idea of what we call universal Darwinism, universal Darwin ideas, Darwinism, but somebody brought up the idea of Darwinian theory by natural selection. Mm-hmm. You said, wait, that posits that it's a deceiving theory in the sense that we only have an interface of DNA and enzymes, and right. The evolutionary model is an interface, right?
Exactly.
But then you say, well, no, this idea still works for my theory because Darwin's idea, like you said, was the acid that dissolves all of our other theories, and we have to discard a lot of things, and we have to test it against Darwin's acid. It dissolves it down to its Occam razor, its most essential components, right? Right. That's interesting, though, because is it possible, could someone argue that that's also an icon, even though it's universal in that sense? What would you respond to that?
Oh, absolutely. I would just, by the way, mention that it was Dan Dennett, I believe, who talked about it as a universal solvent, a universal Darwinism as the acid that dissolves everything. Okay. I didn't want to take. take credit for, I think, a term that Dan Dennett put out there.
Okay.
And I would agree. I think that evolution by natural selection is just a theory within the interface, so it's not deeply true. And universal Darwinism, which I've used in my theorems with Chetan Prakash, is also just a scientific theory within the user interface, and so it's not deeply true. So what am I up to here?
Right.
What I'm up to is I'm saying, look, we have to sort of pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We have to take the best scientific theories we have so far, and we have to say what are our best scientific theories telling us. And evolution by natural selection is telling us there's something beyond space and time. This is not the final reality, because it's telling us that we've been shaped not to see the truth. The very language of space and time and physical objects is the wrong language to describe objective reality. So it's not that I'm getting the shape of the table a little bit wrong, or the color a little bit wrong, or the dimensions of space a little bit distorted. It's that the very language of space and time and objects and colors and motions could not possibly give a true description of objective reality. It's the wrong language. It's like asking someone in a computer science class, I want you to give me a theory about how the CPU in your computer works. You can only use the language of pixels on the desktop. Well, good luck.
Right.
You can't do it with the language of pixels. It's just the wrong language. And so you can't even frame the right theory of a CPU in the language of pixels. And it's the same thing about objective reality. So what evolution by natural selection is telling us, it's saying that the language of space and time and object is the wrong language. And so it's pointing to there's going to be a deeper theory of evolution. Something's dynamic.
Yeah.
And whatever that deeper thing is, when we project it into space-time, it better look like evolution by natural selection. So that's what I'm trying to take our best scientific theories, because there's no better tool that we have right now. And I use universal Darwinism because universal Darwinism extracts the algorithmic core of evolution by natural selection. It extracts it from all the peripheral assumptions. The peripheral assumptions in evolutionary biology are there are things called genes. Creatures live in space and time. Organisms are real in space and time. Those are all peripheral things. The real algorithmic core of evolution by natural selection was captured in the replicator equation. The replicator equation makes, and the notion of various abstract strategies that are competing in an abstract space according to an abstract fitness function. So it's all abstract. No assumption about a real space and time, no assumption about real organisms with real bodies, no assumption about real DNA.
Right.
All of that is peripheral.
Right.
So what John Maynard Smith accomplished was to say, here's the heart of evolution by natural selection with the replicator equation. And notice when you get to the heart of it, all these other peripheral things go away. And then the heart of it actually tells you, the replicator equation actually tells you, all the rest of it is actually really, it is peripheral. It's not essential. And it's pointing us to a deeper theory of evolution outside of space and time that we'll have to project back into space and time and get back evolution by natural selection.
And it holds true even for cosmology. I mean,
Right.
the death and birth of universes. So it does peripherate everything, and it is
Right.
full of potential criticism by compliment. I think you said this. I'm going to paraphrase. Said something in the form of like, I'm inviting criticism. I've created a mathematical model.
Right.
So I'm taking an empirical mindset for these ideas, because it'd be really easy for somebody that's attracted to these ideas on the basis of spirituality or whatever, like to soften it up to the public in a certain way.
Right,
And you're taking this hard stance and saying, I'm still remaining a scientist,
Right.
and these ideas are sensible. So let's go. Let's spar. Let's figure this out.
Absolutely, and the idea is to not identify with your theory, right? So it's just a theory, and if it's wrong, great. The quicker we find out where it's wrong, then I'll move on to the next theory. So what gets in the way is when your ego is tied up with the theories. Then you become dogmatic about it, and then the whole thing grinds to a halt, because as soon as you're dogmatic about a theory, this has to be right. Then you just look back at human history. We've been wrong every time. We've just been consistently wrong. So of course, I would bet long odds against myself right now, and that makes it more exciting. I mean, I take the best I've got so far. I'm always studying. I'm always learning, and I'm always trying to figure out where I'm wrong and trying to then take it to the next level. And that's when science and spirituality interact. That's what I'm hoping to have for the spiritual questions as well. Instead of having, I think many spiritual traditions have lots of deep insights from years of, millennia of studying
Yes.
consciousness and so forth. I think they have a lot of deep insights, but they probably have a lot of nonsense. And we have to be able to sort the insights from the nonsense.
Right.
And if we never even allow the possibility that something that we believe is nonsense, then we'll never be able to discover that it's nonsense. So dogmatism gets in the way. And so, of course, now scientists as individual human beings are just as dogmatic as anybody on the planet, right?
Yeah.
You don't check your dogmatism in at the door
Right.
when you become a scientist. But science as a social institution, that institution is non-dogmatic. Because what it does is it forces scientists to be precise about what they're claiming,
Right.
and to then state what experiment you could do that could potentially prove them wrong. And then even if I'm not going to do the experiment to prove myself wrong,
Right.
Joe over there, he's going to do it because he's competing with me. So other scientists will be working to try to show that your theory is wrong. And that's how, as a social institution, science is non-dogmatic. And so that's what we need to bring to even our spiritual ideas. I would like to take our deep spiritual insights, and I think that we do have some spiritual insights, and then put them on a more formal basis to the extent that they can be. Can we make mathematically precise the insights? And then can we turn them into testable predictions, experiments that we could do? Then we can actually begin to take the deepest questions that are most important to us as human beings. Why are we here? What is life about? Why is there evil? Why is there pain? What happens after death? These are the big questions that we all want to know about. Why shouldn't we use the best tools that we have, namely the tools of science, precision, experimental testing, to try to bring the insights of the spiritual traditions with the tools of science to answer these deep questions?
Right. And it's a humble and more playful approach to the whole situation. And as you said before, all of our scientific theories have been wrong, they've been proven wrong, and they're evolving in that sense.
Right.
Holding loosely to your beliefs, but using them
Right.
as a platform. Otherwise, you're not going to accomplish anything. You have to care, right?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. It's actually a real practical point that you raised for me as a scientist. Because on the one hand, I'm saying almost surely my own theory is wrong. On the other hand, you have to, if you could take it so far and go, well, then I'll just give up,
Right.
We've never been right, so, just
Yeah.
throw in the towel.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go there either. So what you have to have is the idea that we've been wrong, but we're getting deeper insights somehow. And my current theory is probably wrong, but it's interesting enough, and I don't have any better thing to pursue.
Right.
And I don't think there's any principled reason why we might not be able to come to true theories. Right? So even though I've used the theory of evolution by natural selection to say that our perceptions don't show us reality as it is from the evolutionary point of view. From a deeper point of view, I think it's quite possible that we could come to true theories. And the fact that we haven't so far, that we've been consistently wrong, doesn't mean that we will always be wrong. And so it's an interesting thing. You want to have enough energy and hope that you're going to pursue a theory on the one hand, because it does require a lot of energy and hope. On the other hand, you always have to be looking over your shoulder and going, of course I'm probably wrong, let's find out where I'm wrong. So you have to balance the two.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think that meaning and care is accented by the backdrop of a mystery called death,
Right.
aging, all these things, weed, all these, it is an interesting model, and it does bring up questions of
Right.
who's the architect of this? You can only go so far into meaninglessness before your primal motivation kicks in, and it brings back meaning back to you, and the questions keep blossoming and blossoming and blossoming further.
Right.
And this interface is driving us in its own way, but maybe we'll be motivated by something beyond the interface at some point. You never know.
Right. Absolutely. And the theory of conscious agents that I'm working on may lead to a deeper kind of motivation, and hopefully it'll explain why we have the motivations we have within our interface.
Right.
And it may explain, why we are afraid of death, but maybe why death isn't the final end. It'll be very interesting to see what comes out of the theory.
Yeah. And, I wanted to confront the fun idea about the Beatles in Australia.
Yes.
That are leaving all their ladies for the bottle, And you describe illusion as a perception that fails to guide adaptive behavior. And I'm interested in that because it is a good description of an illusion. But at the same time, I thought of some counterexamples and just fun things to think about, like, well, for instance, the placebo effect. You're getting a sugar pill, and yet it's adaptive behavior for you to actually 30% of people will cure themselves, through the psychology, their own psychology.
Right.
Or for instance, like, let's say counterfeit money. It's an illusion, but it has a major fitness payoff until you get caught, right? But
Exactly
the idea there is that would you revise that description or explain it differently as an illusion? Being an illusion if it fails to guide adaptive behavior.
Oh, I see. So I see your question. So the standard definition of an illusion by my colleagues in the field of perception is that an illusion is a perception that doesn't match the truth. Right? That's what they say.
Right.
And I've said that's too strong because according to evolution, none of our perceptions match the truth.
Right.
And yet there is an important distinction. When I show you a sugar cube, there's something different than if I show you a line drawing of a cube that looks like a cube. The one is in some sense an illusion. The line drawing is an illusion of a cube, whereas the sugar cube is not an illusion of a cube. And so there's some sense that distinction is important. And so what I've proposed, as you pointed to, is I propose that the difference between the sugar cube and the drawing of a cube is not that one is true and the other one's false. It's just that one guides adaptive behavior. For example, feeding. With a sugar cube, I can pick it up and eat it and get calories. Whereas with the Nectar cube, it's telling me I should be able to grab it, but I can't grab it. So it's giving me false, information about what I thought would be adaptive actions. So now, in the case of deceptions in nature,
sure.
Right. So we've talked about like orchids will deceive bees. They'll pretend they'll look like a female, or and so in that case, that the orchid is actually putting out an illusion of a female, because for the bee's perception of the orchid is an illusion because it is perceiving a female, but it's not guiding adaptive behavior for the bee.
Right.
Now, from the orchid's point of view, putting out what is an illusion for the bee turns out to be adaptive for the orchid. So it's the bee that's having the illusion. The orchid's not having the illusion.
Right.
Okay. So that's how. So I think the definition still works that way. But that's why I had to go in a little bit of more detail because it's simple, but it's a little tricky.
Yeah. I was hoping that you'd have an answer for that. I'm sure. I didn't think I was going to put you on the spot. So that actually makes.
Oh, and I want you to try to put me on the spot.
Yeah.
That's the whole point here is to put me on the spot. Right.
I would have a difficult time at that. I'm just enjoying like the interaction and you just like feeling in the flesh of this whole idea. But I go on to something fun like the whole concept you have in your book about the beauty being in the eye of the beholder.
Yes,
right. And the experiments that you did, and even some of the predictions you made, that then if you take identical photos of a woman and you enlarge the sclera and the annula, and the annula over time in a woman it shrinks, right, and it's the area around the
right.
Anola,
So the limbo ring.
Limbo ring.
Right.
Sorry, the limbo ring. It shrinks over time.
Statistically.
Statistically.
That's right.
So you can take a photo that's identical of a woman and put it in front of a male, and he's gonna like code for fitness in those photos, and he's going to, if you just Photoshop it and make that blackened area a little bit larger in the woman, he'll find it more attractive, and it's based on the fact that it codes for youth within the woman.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So part of this now, this is standard evolutionary psychology, right? So this is not my new ideas about perception and reality. This. So I don't want to take any claims for deep insights about evolutionary psychology and its notion of attractiveness. So it's standard in evolutionary psychology to say that attractiveness, when you look at a person in that initial half of a second, you get a hit about whether they're attractive or not. What from evolutionary point of view is happening is you're evaluating dozens of sensory clues visual cues about the symmetry of the face, properties of the eyes, shininess of the hair, the quality of the voice, all sorts of cues. You're doing it unconsciously, and you're coming up with an estimate of the reproductive potential of that person. What is the probability that this person could have and successfully raise kids? Now, it's not what you're consciously thinking about, but unconsciously you have hundreds of millions of neurons that are processing all this sensory information in half a second, putting it all together, because the cues don't necessarily all agree, right? You might have a nice symmetric face, but your hair might not be very shiny.
Right.
And you may have a wart right there. I mean, so it's not all telling you that you're great or not. It's a really.
But it's not only physical attributes, right? It can also be mental attributes that you can derive from speaking with that person. Maybe
that would be later on.
Okay.
Right. This would be an initial this initial attractiveness is like what you just get in half a second, that initial hit, and there you're literally, according to evolutionary psychology, and I think it's onto something. You're estimating the reproductive potential of the person. And again, that's not what you're thinking. You just find them attractive or not.
Right.
And so using that general framework, I and some of my students, I can mention a couple of other names, so a couple of my students looked at some features of the eyes that I thought and they thought would be affecting this computation of the attractiveness. So I had noticed, I was looking at a picture of the Afghan girl, which is a cover shot on National Geographic, which is their most famous cover shot. Most people have actually seen it. The Afghan girl with the thing wrapped around her head, and she's got these eyes that are just, you can't stop looking at her and her eyes. So I was trying to figure out what it was about her, and I noticed that around the iris of the eye, so the iris is the colored part of the eye, I noticed that there was the dark ring at the very edge of the iris of her eye. And that dark ring, together with her dark pupil, at the middle of the iris, there's the dark pupil where the light actually goes through through your eye into your retina. They're so striking that it was almost like a bullseye. She has a limbal ring and then a bullet, another dark pupil in the middle. It was like a bullseye. I was wondering, maybe that limbal ring is somehow part of what makes her so attractive and attention-grabbing. So to check that, I informally looked at a bunch of pictures of infants through older adults, and informally I started to notice that in infants, that limbal ring was really quite distinct statistically, and there are some infants that don't have it. But statistically, it seemed to me that the infants seemed to have a nice, thick, and well-defined limbal ring. And as people got older, it became less thick in proportion to the whole eye and less distinct. And that then means that the limbal ring, its distinctness and thickness, is correlated with youth. And it turns out things that are correlated with youth are correlated with the reproductive potential. The younger a woman is, the more likely she is to be able to reproduce. A 50-year-old woman is much less likely to reproduce than a 20-year-old woman.
Right.
For men, the correlation is not as strong,
right.
but it turns out that the distinctness of the limbal ring is also associated with health. Yeah. You have to have a clear cornea. If you have some kind of problems with your cornea that do happen with age, where it becomes less clear, then you can't see the limbal ring as well. So because the limbal ring looked to me to be correlated with youth and health, I predicted that it would be more attractive if you took two pictures of a woman's face or a man's face, put them side by side, same picture, and just doctored up the limbal rings to make them a little bit more distinct in one of the faces. I predicted that it would be more attractive. And so my graduate student, Darren Peshek, was deeply involved in this work, and he and a number of undergraduates scoured lots of pictures of faces and found that statistically, what I thought was intuitively correct, they found was in fact the case, that statistically the limbal ring really is more distinct and more visible and a bigger part of the eye in infants than in adults. So then Darren and his undergraduates worked and did this experiment.
Yeah.
So the subjects had to, we showed them a bunch of faces. It was 2 faces in each trial. They were the same face, but one had limbal rings, the other one didn't. And we just asked the person, just tell us which of the 2 faces is more attractive. And a lot of times the subjects would go, well, how can I do that? They're the same face. I mean, they look exactly the same.
Right.
We would say, well, humorous, just pick one. And so they would do it, and they'd, well above chance, pick the one that had the limbal rings. And so here we are, we're finding that you have this algorithm built into you that's going and looking for the limbal ring and looking for the distinctness. You have no idea that it's doing that, and yet, but you just know the result of it. This person is more attractive than that one. And so there are dozens of cues like that. So I worked also on the iris width. So I noticed, again, looking at pictures of babies and adults, that the colored part of the iris is almost 90% of the eye in infants. But by the time you're an adult, it's about 41% of the eye. And again, my graduate student, Nagar Samak Najad, and her undergraduate students working with her checked that and found statistically, again, the iris is big proportion of the eye in infants, and it drops to about 41% in adults. And so she did the experiments where in female eyes, we have 2 females face to face, side by side, same picture of the female, and we just widened the iris just a little bit in one of them. So it made the irises just a little bit bigger, which would make the woman look just a little bit younger. And we predicted that men would find a woman whose iris was just a little bit bigger more attractive because she would be just a little bit younger. And we did it, and again, the men would look at it, and some of them would go, it's the same woman, how can I do this? I mean, how can I say one's more attractive? And when we asked them, just pick one, they, well above chance, picked the one with the larger iris.
That's amazing, yeah.
So this is, what's nice about this, I'll just say, is that we're using evolutionary theory, not to talk about what might have happened a million years ago.
Right.
We're using it to make a new prediction about what will happen in an experiment we haven't done yet. So this is, a lot of people think evolution is just so stories about the past and who could ever test that. No, I was using it in my team, so Darren Pashek and Nagar Samak Najad, my graduate students working on this, we were using evolutionary theory to make risky predictions about the outcomes of experiments that we hadn't done.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that
we're running out. I gotta stop a couple things.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Right.
depending on depending on how much longer.
I've just got a few questions left, but I'm into it. So
we run out of batteries before we run out of ideas.
We're rolling again.
Oh, yeah, I've got 440 students in it. They're all 18, 19-year-olds. I give them 2 lectures on attractiveness, 2 or 3. So I use that to teach them evolutionary psychology. But I figured that's
got their interest.
it's going to get their interest, and I teach them really valuable things that they can use to actually help them understand what's going on when they're dating and so forth.
Navigate the whole
that's right.
landscape of dating. It's hard,
Right, absolutely.
And, cool. Right on. Yeah, and also in regards to that too, the funny thing, I was reading through your book about how a woman, what a man responds to, but so interesting what a woman responds to. I actually had an ex-girlfriend when I was younger. I was kind of a reckless kind of guy, as you described in your book, maybe a little bit more rugged features, et cetera, et cetera. And she actually at one point just like looked at me and said, I just wish that I could have my, other guy who is sensitive, is like there for me and like, wants commitment and everything like that. You just want to enjoy our time together and do your thing. And she goes, I wish I could have him and then just have you on the side. And then I was like, I connected that with the idea that like this woman that we're describing who's ovulating, she suddenly has this experience where she wants a guy who is like a little bit more
rugged,
maybe pushy, rugged, maybe assertive, a lot of testosterone, larger bone density, right? And then when she's not ovulating, and she's also a little more prone towards cheating during that period,
right?
And then when she's not, she's like, I need to find a man who's cooperative, who's going to be there, help cook the meals, help take care of the child, and things of that nature. Those are powerfully 2 different spectrums of men. And you want one here,
right?
But this one's probably better for you in the long run, right? So again, what we're talking about with
Right.
informing people about what
Right,
is
right.
happening within them, so they don't impulsively go a direction they don't really want for themselves. Right?
That's right, and also so that you don't need to be criticizing yourself and so forth. When you realize that this is just the way we're wired up.
Right.
So
Right.
it turns out that you can look at what's called the P300 in women when they're looking at pictures of men's faces. So you put on electroencephalogram, EEG system on their head, and you show these women just pictures of men's faces, and you measure the electrical activity of the brain. And if they find a man's face really interesting, attractive, they'll get something called a P300. About a third of a second after they see the face, there'll be parts of the brain that have a positive deflection in the EEG. That's the P300. So you can find out, of course you could ask women what they find more attractive, but you can look at it directly in their EEG. So, sometimes, maybe they don't want to be honest or something. You can just measure it.
Wow.
Wow. And what you do find is that during the high fertility phase of the month, the more high testosterone male faces get more excitement, and not as much during the low fertility phase of the cycle. And what's interesting from an evolutionary point of view is, again, this is not a conscious, cynical kind of choice that women are making. It's just it's been programmed into their genes.
Right.
Women who happened...
Genes choosing for them.
Genes choosing for them. At least this is the evolutionary story, right? So the evolutionary story within that scientific framework is that those of our female ancestors who happened to have had genetic proclivity to like the high testosterone males during the high fertility phase, and then the lower testosterone males during the non-fertile phase, were more successful in reproduction, and therefore they were more likely to have females that had that programmed into them, and so that spread through the whole. So it's not a matter of cynical, calculation. It's just what worked. Why did it work? It works because high testosterone males statistically are genetically more healthy than low testosterone males, statistically. So by mating with the high testosterone male, she's increasing the probability of having better genes in her offspring. But the high testosterone males tend to be less likely to commit and to be there to actually provide. Right. And the low testosterone males are more likely, again, all statistical. There are always exceptions. So low testosterone males more likely to be there long term and to provide the resources that she would need, especially during, the Pleistocene, when all this stuff was evolving. The sexual roles were really separate. A woman really, when she had kids, she really did need a provider. It's not so much the case in Western democracies now, right? Yeah. There's all sorts of things that we have to take the burden off. But during the Pleistocene, a woman's success at raising a kid really correlated highly with having a mate, a male, who could provide for her. And so that's programmed into women, which is very interesting. So whereas a male's success in reproduction did not depend on the resources of the female, it only depended on her youth. Right. So men are programmed for that. But for a female, her success in the Pleistocene depended on the health of the male and also his resources. Right. So women are more complicated. Right. They had these more complex factors that shape their ratings of attractiveness of males, even to this day. And it turns out, if you might say, well, what about a woman in a Western society today who's rich? Does that mean, now that she doesn't need the resources of a male, she's rich? Right. Will she be less inclined to be attracted to a man based on his resource? Turns out it's just the opposite of what you expect. A woman who's rich will be even more insistent that the man that she dates has resources. Wow. And so it's not because she's lacking resources this is wired into us deeply in evolution, the Pleistocene. And in some sense, a woman who is young, healthy, and rich basically knows I can have it all. Right. And so I'm going to demand that I have it all. And what I want, even though I don't need it, what I want is a man with resources. Yeah. And so I will have a man with resources. Yeah. And but why she doesn't need it? So logically, you might say, well, since I don't need it, I won't have it. But it's wired into her from the Pleistocene to want that, and so that's what she
So
goes
it
for.
exaggerates in her as opposed to diminishes.
Exactly right.
She wants more choice. And
Exactly right.
whatever's wired in, let's have more of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the evolutionary stuff, again, I think it's the best theory we have right now of a lot of these things. As I said earlier, I think evolution is only true in the interface. It's not deeply true, but it's really interesting in the interface, the kinds of predictions that it makes.
Right.
And these are really helpful to understand.
And I think it's good too, in regards to that, is to not reject facts and information and statistics, because essentially, if you want to change the paradigm, the moral landscape of, like, let's say with the emerging new gender politics, like you have to know where you're coming from, right? Even regardless of how you want to you want to frame your reality, like you pay attention to where the compulsions are, and then if you feel like they should be different for you or other people, at least know where you're coming from, right? At that level. There are differences.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think that it really does help to understand the evolution of our physical sexuality and our mental identification of our sexuality.
Oh, yeah.
And that apparently, my understanding right now is that they seem typically, during gestation, the physical sex develops at a different time than the brain wiring for who you're going to think of as what you're going to think of as your sex. And typically, even though they happen at different times, they're coordinated and so forth. But in a few people, they're not. And so you get someone who's born with one gender body, but their brain is wired up to be the other gender. And so it's really helpful to understand that happens. It's just part of nature, and it's not demon possession or some weird thing like that. It's not some deep sin. This is just what happens.
Yeah, and I think just because I was reading your book, it spawned me on another path in regards to animals and same-sex interactions in animals. And there was examples where two men would be useful together to take care of an offspring, and they would bind together on that basis. So it was for a fitness. It was for the idea of making sure that your DNAs express themselves in the next generation. So it's interesting.
Right. Yeah. It's been an interesting open problem in evolution to explain the natural selection pressures for homosexuality. Yeah. It's been very, very interesting, and there are some interesting theories about it. One is, and I don't think that anybody's certain about these theories. But these are interesting ideas. One is that it appears that women who are more fertile, in the sense that they tend to have more and more kids, also are more likely to have homosexual sons who are homosexual.
Okay.
So again, it's all statistical, right? But that suggests that perhaps homosexuality and the fertility of the mother are correlated. And so one possibility is that even if homosexuality was not selected for, whereas the greater fertility of the woman is selected for, the selection for the fertility might increase the probability of homosexuality. Wow. So that's one idea.
That's interesting.
But another idea which actually says that homosexuality is selected for is the helpful uncle idea, that the homosexual males would be perhaps helpful to raise the offspring of their siblings. And again, I'm not saying that we have strong evidence yet for any of these ideas, but it's the kind of idea that you would play with in evolutionary theory.
And like you said, universal Darwinism, it suddenly brings all of these disparate things together, like Occam's razor, and gives us oftentimes a sensible mathematics for our behavior. So it's a powerful theory, like
Right, absolutely.
It's.
I agree.
So I'm going to try and make physics interesting somehow, because a lot of the basis and the foundation behind your theories have to do with new emerging, with seeming contradictions in physics. About our reality, about our macro reality, the one we see every day. Because at the deepest, kind of like profoundest, like smallest levels of how we're trying to assess the nature of reality, we have, well, I'll just mention one of the cubism. The quantum states reflect the beliefs of the observer. And this is kind of based, I think, on Wheeler's experiment, the delayed choice experiments, and I think the double slit experiment is super interesting, and it just, I'll try and quickly frame it, but essentially there's two slits, and if you shoot photons towards those two slits and you record it at the end, you're going to get a diffraction pattern, a wave-like pattern. So the photons are going to seemingly kind of almost like replicate themselves or get into a superposition, and then they'll go through and they'll form a wave-like pattern against the the recording facade. And if you take and record one of those slits, because you want to put that, it seems to happen at the point of recording, that now you have particles that are being shot through these double slits, and wherever you put your recording device to record whichever slit, they seem to then become and behave like particles, and go through just that slit, and show diffraction and show the pattern on the facade at the end of the membrane. And then there's the delayed choice experiment where they're like, whoa, okay, let's figure out, like, let's wait until it's left and gone through the slits, one or the other, and then we'll record it. Going through one of the slits, and it then almost backwards in time starts to behave that way. So then we get to and I don't need to go further too much in it, but local realism, right? When particles are entangled, you can remove them at a space that it would take light a certain speed to achieve any information between those two particles, and yet you can measure them at the same time before light can even get there, and they will respond to one another, or you'll see the opposite measurement from the measurement according to the spin. That's locality, right? But we're showing that locality isn't a thing that we can stand behind anymore. And then realism is that, and like you said about this cup right here, when I look away from it, we assume that the cup's still there. But according to physics, there's no way to know the state of that particle until you observe it. And then when you observe it, it seems to interact with you at some level. There seems to be a relationship between the observer and the object. Can you connect that with your theory, or help us understand that?
Right. So in quantum theory, you do have this situation where when a particle doesn't have an apparent definite position or momentum. When you write down what we call the quantum state of the particle, you'll say, well, there's a certain probability that it might have this position, or a certain probability it has this position, or it has a probability of spinning this way, but also a probability of spinning the opposite way. And when physicists then start to ask, well, what does this mean? Because when you actually observe, then you get a specific value, right? You get a position, you get a value of the spin. And so they're trying to understand, what is quantum theory telling us? When we're not observing, we have to write down these superpositions. So it could be the probabilities of all these things, up, spin, down, spin, this position, that position. We have to write down probabilities, or what they call probability amplitudes for all these things. So what is the mathematics trying to tell us about reality? And then you mentioned entanglement. So I could have a particle over here and a particle a billion light years away, and it turns out there are certain states where if the spin of this one is measured up, then I know that the spin of the other one has to be down, for example, immediately, even though it's a billion light years away. And so that's called entanglement. And so physicists have been trying, so the mathematics is what it is. That's what the mathematics tells us. They're trying to now understand what that means about the nature of reality. So some will say what that means is that there's a non-local connection, right? So that the measurement here instantaneously affects the value over there of these entangled particles. So they'll say that it entails non-locality across space. Some will say what it means is that there are many, many different universes And in one universe, if there are 1,000 different positions that the particle might be, according to my quantum state function, what they call the wave function, if it says that there's 1,000 different positions it might be, well, then there really are 1,000 different universes. And there is a particle in each one of those universes that has that value in each one. So this is the many worlds or multiverse kind of thing. Everett was someone who proposed this. So in some sense, they're saying that we only see one of the universes in which we got the value that we got when we made our measurement. But there's 1,000 copies of you, or 1,000,000, or 1,000,000,000, or an infinite number of copies of you in other universes where the other values came out. And then cubism, which you mentioned, Chris Fuchs and some other collaborators. I can also mention more recently David Merman is a proponent of cubism. What they say is, look, the quantum wave function is not a property of objective reality, right? So we tend to think of, I have a wave function for an electron that says the probability of spin along the z-axis is 1/2 for it to be up and 1/2 for it to be down. And we think of that as telling us the truth about objective reality. And what cubism says is, no. The wave function is an experimenter's statement of the degrees of belief they have about what they will see if they do certain experiments on that electron. So it's all about, so you could have a different wave function from me for that electron. And so there's something called Wigner's friend experiment, in which you could have one guy in a room making a measurement about the spin of an electron up and down on some axis. And there's a friend of the person outside the room that doesn't know what's going on in the room. And all he knows is that there's this probably 1/2 of spin up or spin down. So the guy inside the room has his wave function, spin up. And if he makes his measurement, now he knows what he saw, like spin up. But the guy outside still doesn't know what his friend saw. Yeah. So he still has to have a different wave function, spin up 1/2, spin down 1/2, or square root of 1/2, the amplitude. And so what cubism is saying, that in the Wigner's friend situation, the reason why you have to have two different wave functions is because wave functions just are the degrees of belief that different experimenters have about what they'll measure. And so since this guy outside hasn't measured anything yet, he still has to have the superposition wave function, whereas the guy inside has made the measurement, so he has a different wave function. So the wave function is not a statement of objective reality, it's a statement of the degrees of belief. I think that the cubist interpretation is very, very close to the idea that I'm proposing, that what we're seeing is not objective reality, it's our subjective world. Yeah. This is all my VR headset. Space-time itself is just my VR headset. And so it's no surprise that the wave function, which is a property about something inside my headset, is just my own subjective degrees of belief. Right. So my idea really fits well with most of cubism. There is one part of cubism it doesn't fit well with, and I've talked a little bit with Chris Fuchs about this, but I need to talk more with him. He thinks that the dimension, this is a technical thing, but the dimension of what the so-called Hilbert space of the particle, that's an objective property of reality. And I have to say, no, even what we call the dimension of the particle's Hilbert space is not part of objective reality. All of it, if it's about something in space and time, it's completely subjective because it's just your interface.
Right. And so, the idea of that we're in this interface now, that goes to your ultimate idea of we're conscious observers working together, formulating this reality, and consciousness is the fundamental aspect of it. Not the things that we infer in our environment. It's our consciousness, of course, informed by Darwinian evolution. And then that's kind of like that's the foundation of reality.
Right. That's what I am proposing. And that's a separate, by the way, it's a separate hypothesis, right? So it doesn't follow from my evolutionary work with Chetan and my graduate students. Right. So that's one bit of work that says what we're seeing is just a user interface is not the truth. So that's one bit of work from evolution. There's a second bit of work that then says, well, if this is just an interface, what's behind the interface? And there I'm taking another leap. It's a completely separate leap. And I'm saying, the reason I take the leap I do is that I'm interested in what's called the hard problem of consciousness. It's been a problem that we've known about for at least 3 centuries. That we have these correlations between brain activity and conscious experiences. So if I take, for example, a strong magnet, a transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS device, and I touch it to my skull close to an area of the brain called V4, and I put it in inhibit mode. So I'm inhibiting the activity of area V4 in my visual cortex. What happens is, in the left part of my visual world, color just disappears. It just drains away. I just see like a black and white television view. And then when I turn off the magnet, the color comes flowing back in. And if I did it in the left hemisphere, then I would lose color in the right visual field, and then it would come back. And we have hundreds of correlations like this between brain activity and conscious experiences. I can take a magnet, that same TMS unit, touch it to what's called the temporoparietal junction area. Just touching it to your skull by the TPJ. Inhibit, and all of a sudden I will have an out-of-body experience. My consciousness changes. My consciousness now feels like it's not attached to my body. I turn off the magnet, I'm back into my body. So these conscious experiences are tightly correlated with neural activity, the inhibition of neural activity. By the way, if I take the magnet and stimulate V4 instead of inhibiting it, then I will get psychedelic color experiences in the left visual field. So you can have psychedelics without drugs. So there are all these correlations between brain activity and conscious experiences. The big question in science, one of the biggest questions, is to come up with a theory. Because just the fact that we have correlations, that's just data. That's not a theory. We want a theory that says precisely what brain activity, if your theory is that brain activity causes conscious experiences, and that's what most of my colleagues think. Neural activity somehow causes conscious experience, or embodied neural activity, a brain in a body and interacting with the environment. Then we want to know with mathematical precision what exact neural activity is, for example, or causes my taste of chocolate or the smell of garlic, my conscious experience, and why that neural activity has to be my experience of the taste of chocolate, and why it could not be the taste of vanilla. So we want, and if your idea is that many of my colleagues think, well, it's not so much the brain activity, it's the program running in the brain. So it's not neurons per se, but it's the pattern of the neural activity, sort of the program there. So, and we could presumably even take that pattern, pull it out of the brain and put it in a computer, and that pattern would then, in the program, would give rise to the conscious experiences. Well, in that case, then I want to know exactly, with mathematical precision, what patterns are the taste of vanilla, why they must be the taste of vanilla, and why they couldn't be the taste of chocolate. And they've made no progress on that. I mean, there's not any person on the planet with a theory that can explain even one specific conscious experience. And so that's why I'm going after consciousness. All of my colleagues are trying to start with brain activity and boot up consciousness, and they failed. I'm giving a diagnosis. The brain doesn't exist when it's not perceived. Just like I render the red Mustang when I look at the red Mustang in the VR thing, and then I delete it, I garbage collect it when I look away, I create the brain and neurons when I look inside of skulls, and then I delete them. Neurons do not exist when they're not perceived. Neurons therefore cause none of my behaviors, and they cause none of my conscious experiences. They're just icons that I create when I look. And that's why my colleagues have been going down a rabbit hole that won't work. They've been thinking that neurons exist and have real causal powers, and neurons can cause our conscious experiences. I'm saying evolution by natural selection says you're wrong. Now, so given that we can't assume anything in space and time as fundamental reality, including neurons, so neurons, like any other objects, are our creation. They don't create our conscious experiences. We create them in our conscious experiences. It's the other way. So that's why I'm now saying, okay, instead of trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness, how is consciousness related to brain activity? Instead of solving it with starting with brain activity and trying to boot up consciousness, I'm saying I'll start the other way. I'll start with consciousness. I have to have a mathematical model of consciousness, and I need to show you how I can get space and time and objects as just a user interface. But once I've done that, then I should be able to show you how the brain activity within that interface is correlated with the conscious experiences. So that was my motivation to say the objective reality is consciousness. Here's my mathematical model of consciousness. Here's the dynamics of consciousness. And here's how it projects back into our space-time interface and gives us what we call physics and evolution.
That's super interesting, I have to say. Like, I finally, it took me this long to finally, for a moment, and little sneak peeks into what you're actually trying to say with your theory, and then I just got it, you know, like, how do you use consciousness to explain consciousness?
Right.
It's a very personal experience, the taste of chocolate, even if you were to download it into a computer, you throw into another brain, well, now you have a conscious experience. Like, how is that going to resemble the taste of chocolate of the other person? Just by definition, using consciousness to explain consciousness is like, it's senseless, it seems to me.
Right, and my colleagues, and by the way, these are brilliant people. Many of them are my friends, so there's nothing personal here. But they've been trying to have a mathematically precise theory that starts with some description of brain activity, or the functions or the programs running in the brain, and getting out consciousness. Or like one group has orchestrated collapses of microtubule states and neurons and so forth. But whatever it might be, they've not been able to come up with a mathematically precise theory that starts with some physical system or a program and tells you precisely when, say, the taste of vanilla will appear, and why it has to be the taste of vanilla that's associated with that function. There's literally nothing on the table, and it's not because they're not bright. These are really, really bright, hardworking people. I think that we've set ourselves an impossible task. I think it's just this simple. You cannot start with unconscious ingredients and ever boot up consciousness.
Got it.
Can't be done.
Got it.
And the reason my really bright colleagues continue to do this is because the assumption of physicalism, the assumption that space-time and physical objects are fundamental, has been spectacularly successful in science, at least since Newton, since Galileo. So for many centuries, it's been spectacularly successful. It's given us all the modern technology that we have today. And it's really helped us to get past a lot of dogmas and some of the religious beliefs that we had that were clearly nonsense. It's really helped us to dispel them. And so, given that it's been so successful, most of my scientific colleagues want to stick with physicalism. But now we've come up against a problem, the hard problem of consciousness, where I think we're seeing that physicalism reached its limits.
Right.
It was great for many, many problems. It cannot solve the hard problem of consciousness. And we have to go to a deeper framework. Now, I should point out, it's one thing for cognitive scientists to say this, that physics, space-time being fundamental has had a good ride and it's all over. I'm a cognitive scientist. What do the real physicists have to say about this?
Yeah.
And it turns out that there's a number of them, including Professor Nima Arkani Hamed, who's at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. And if you Google the phrase "space-time is doomed," and his name, you will find videos in which he explains that it's over for space-time. It's over. It's had a good run for the last 3 or 4 centuries. Physics has been about what happens inside space and time. But now we realize that there's got to be something deeper. And he actually gives a number of reasons why space-time is dead, why it's doomed. He's found, and a number of people have found, not just him, in the Large Hadron Collider, they smash particles together and see how they scatter. You might have 2 gluons hit each other and 4 gluons go spraying out. And they look at the probabilities of these events, what they call scattering amplitudes. And they have to compute them because they're doing billions of these per second. And most of them, they know what's going to happen. So they need to be able to compute and find the events that they already know. There's no new physics here. We've already got that in our models. We're looking for the diamond, in the mud, this huge pile of mud with the new pearl that right, so they're looking for the new events. And so they have to be able to compute these scattering amplitudes. And it turns out when you do it in the standard physics of space and time using what they call Feynman diagrams and so forth, it turns out you get hundreds of pages, sometimes 1,000 pages of algebra that you have to compute. It's ugly and nasty. And so they, for the last 30 years, they tried to get the mathematics to be simpler and simpler because they couldn't compute it. They needed to compute it. And they discovered, some brilliant mathematicians discovered that in every case, you could collapse all of the hundreds of pages of mathematics into 1 or 2 terms that you could compute by hand on the back of an envelope, trivially, if you let go of space and time. If you don't do the computation in space and time, you find that the data actually has deep symmetries. The scattering amplitude data has deep symmetries that cannot be expressed in space and time. That's the first thing. Symmetries, the physicists go after the symmetries. The symmetries cannot be expressed in space and time. That's already a big ding against space-time. Yeah. But then the mathematics becomes trivial. When you go outside of space and time, you let go of it, then the mathematics becomes trivial. So you have these things. The math becomes simple and insightful, and you see symmetries that you can't see in space and time. Bye-bye space-time. Yeah. There's something deeper. But they don't know what it is. Right. They don't. So what they're saying is, we're going to have a new, deeper framework for physics in which space-time emerges, and they don't know what that deeper framework is.
That's crazy.
I'm proposing this network of conscious agents. Yeah. They're not proposing that, by the way. I mean, so when I go to the next step and say I'm saying it's a network of conscious agents, there are no physicists that I know of who are on board with that.
Right.
So where the physicists are right now is Nima Arkani Hamed has said space-time is doomed. David Gross, a Nobel Prize winner, has said that. There are a couple others who have said space-time is doomed. And actually, Nima actually has said that most of us believe that space-time is doomed. Most physicists at the forefront.
Maybe.
Yeah, they all
can't come out with that kind of.
Well, I think it's not. They're not trying to hide it among themselves. This is like it's an open secret among them. That, you know, it's the kind of thing where you may not talk to people outside because you don't know what to say in addition to it. Right? Beyond space-time is doomed. Yeah. We don't know what the deeper thing is. Right. But among the real physicists at the state of the art, like Nima, especially the younger ones, this is pretty exciting. Yeah. I mean, the old guard did a good job. Yeah. It's our chance to do something brand new. Yeah. Let go of space-time and find out a deeper framework. And so I'm saying I'm on board with that. Space-time, according to evolution by natural selection, is doomed.
It's a fabrication.
Yeah, it's just our headset. Yeah. It's just a virtual reality headset. It's not the final reality. And now the physicists are coming at it from physics. And so when evolution by natural selection and physics are saying space-time is doomed, I think we have to take it quite seriously. Space-time is doomed. And now my proposal that what's behind space-time is conscious agents. Now, of course, no physicists that I know of are on board with that. That as far as I could tell, they would probably look at that and go, you know, many of them would say that that's nuts. Right. So the burden is on me and my team to take this idea, make it mathematically precise, and show that we can get back space-time and physics from the idea. So we have a lot of work ahead.
So the final thing I'd ask you is, and this has been absolutely fantastic. You can see the light, the color of the light changing on the side of your face because
that's right. Yeah,
we've lost a few.
Right.
We've burned through a few batteries. We've run out of a data card. So it's been a good conversation. I guess what I want to ask then is for all like your groupies or all the people who are like really kind of biting at the bit to know when, how, when, and in which way are you this final problem of proving the conscious agents are the foundation of a lot of new ideas that are emerging through your theory. How are you doing it? When do you think you'll be done? and and will there be a book? These kinds of things.
Right. So we've published 2 papers already with our theory of conscious agents on it. So it's in Frontiers of Psychology, and if anybody wants to send me an email, I can send them a link to it, but it's called Objects of Consciousness. So if you just search for my name, Donald Hoffman, Objects of Consciousness is the name of the paper, and it's in Frontiers of Psychology. It's available for free online. So you can actually see our mathematical model of consciousness. And what we're doing now is we've written down the model, but once you've written down the mathematical model, now you have to explore where the mathematics is going to take you. Right? The mathematics becomes smarter than you. So like when Einstein wrote down the theory of general relativity in an equation, he had no idea that it entailed black holes. He didn't like it either. He didn't like black holes. Right. He didn't believe in them for decades. And so once you write down the theory, I mean, we're still it's literally been more than 100 years since Einstein wrote down. We're still exploring what that equation means and where it's taking us. There's lots of things to explore. So what I'm doing right now personally is I'm learning what's called spectral graph theory because I'm dealing with these networks of conscious agents. So I need to understand the tools of graph theory where they actually look at dynamics on graphs, so networks of interacting agents. There's a lot of mathematics on it, so my team, we're all learning that, and we're going to then start to understand the dynamics of conscious agents and also natural projections into a space-time interface. Here's the idea. Think about it this way. What we're proposing is like the Twitterverse, right? In the Twitterverse, there are tens of millions of Twitter users, billions of tweets, lots of stuff trending. There's no way that any Twitter user could really comprehend all that. I could never interact with all 10 million, all the millions of Twitter users. I couldn't see all the tweets. But suppose I really want to get a feeling of what's happening in New York City versus Los Angeles versus Irvine, and just get what are the hot spots for Twitter? What kinds of issues are trending in Australia? What I want then is a visualization tool that somehow collapses all the billions of tweets and millions of users into some three-dimensional graphic that I can see. So whenever we have big social media data, we need to use visualization tools to understand it. That's what I'm proposing. Reality is this network of conscious agents. Space-time is our visualization tool. Space-time and physical object is just our visualization tool for this vast social network. We've made the rookie mistake, our species has made a rookie mistake of taking our space-time visualization tool as the final reality. It's just really stupid. So now it's time for us to just wake up. We've had this headset on, it's just a visualization tool. There's this vast network of social conscious agents, this vast social network of conscious agents out there that we've been compressing into our space-time interface just to simplify things.
Yeah.
But now science can actually go out there and explore this vast network of conscious agents outside of the space-time interface using, for example, spectral graph theory and all these tools that we've developed for understanding social networks. So we develop all these tools for social networks. I'm now applying them to this network of conscious agents. So fortunately, many of the tools are already built. I just have to learn them. My team and I are learning them, and we're going to then use them to understand how our dynamics of conscious agents works, and hopefully to show that we can get back evolution by natural selection as a projection.
That's amazing. Thank you, Dad.
Then a book.
This has been wonderful. I've been looking forward to this, and I really appreciate all your contributions. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Cool.
Wow.
Awesome. Yeah.
Right?
Your brain's moving?
Yeah.
Pretty crazy stuff.
I feel like, just laying in bed and need a cigarette.